All right, to start everything off, since this is comic book themed, I want to take everyone on a journey. I want to take you all away from this universe, someplace like you've never seen before. One of our conference rooms. Now, imagine you're on a call with a client, and they're asking for a feature or more functionality or just adding to a screen that already has so much on it, and you look very much like these three sad individuals do right now. You're confused, you don't know what to do, where are you going to put this, we don't have room for this, and so your next call of action is to call the UX team. And here come the designers, and the fun begins. Now, I know many of you right now are probably wondering this. Hello, my name is Jordan Lawrence, and I'm an interaction designer on the UX team. I'm going to start off today by talking a little bit about myself so I don't look like some crazy guy just spewing nonsense on a stage, even though I put that picture of myself up as an introduction. First, I've been at Cerner for just about 6 years now. I spent about a year and a half of that as an intern, delightfully doing icons day in and day out, and then moved my way on into interaction design. I've spent the majority of that UX design, interaction design period in the Reg and Sketch space, living within RevCycle, but I've done everything, like I said, from icons to referrals and everything in between. I have the opportunity, starting the spring semester of 2018, to begin to mold the young minds of the students at UMKC and be a professor and teach experience design. So with those three things, you're probably like, all right, guy, UX is covered, but your talk is called Infinity Gems. Are you that nerdy? Yes, I am. This is my 4th DevCon, working on all the visuals and everything you guys see around you. And as always, I hope you guys are enjoying everything we've put together for you. Next, I have a library of comic books both at my house, and the nerdier part is at my desk. I am one of those guys who usually not only points out the differences between the comic books and the movies, but most likely will complain as well. I have a jubilee of those little pop figures on my desk, and right in the middle of where all 4 desks meet, I have a Thanos piggy bank holding up the gauntlet. Is this nerdy? Yes. Is this sad? Also yes. When I have free time, I draw stuff, almost exclusively comic book characters. And cue shameless plug, check out my stuff at LawDraw on Instagram, cough cough. Lastly, I've been told on no less than 2 separate occasions that I kind of look like Jeremy Renner. And since his hero pretty much just shoots bow and arrows, I guess you could say I'm Hawkeye. So that's a pretty big deal. He is an Avenger. All right, time to get on with the actual presentation. My goal today is simple, and that is to go over just the basics of creating UX. And I want everybody here on a level playing field, mainly all the non-designers, which are pretty much just about the 45 people right there. I want everybody else to be on a level playing field. I want you to understand kind of the method to our madness, so that I hope a future difficult workflow doesn't become a difficult conversation. Now you're probably sitting there like, how is that possible, guy I just met? Well, I'm going to go over this by using 2 simple categories, and that's design and validation. Each of these will have 3 subcategories, with design being compiled of words, declutteringness, and clarity. Validation is going to be made up of testing our designs, being humble, and delighting our users. To help with some of this conversation, especially for the design portion of everything, I've created a screen. Now, I know that we are in the healthcare space and we have many one-off situations and a lot of complicated workflows, so I've specifically taken a step out of the healthcare space so that nobody gets too lost in the weeds. This is called the multiverse, and this is what Star-Lord uses to kind of manage his day. He's got his bills, he's got things he needs to do, he's got some trending topics going on, but it's very, very busy, and everything is kind of on a level playing field. It's very hard to scan. So right off the bat, we get that feel that there's a lot of text, there's a lot of stuff going on. So what I'm going to do is use this busy screen, and as I go through each design category, I'm going to kind of chip away at it and show how that benefits both the UI and the UX of this screen. So this lack of organization, especially with the text, leads us into our first topic, which is words. If there's one thing I've learned by doing countless tests for countless different workflows ranging in different levels of complexity, it's very simple, and that is people don't read. It's because of this fact that when and where we place words, we need to make sure they're as meaningful and as clear as possible. You know, you can say several different things. Are they lazy? Are they careless? Are they in a hurry? Do they just hate to read? Whatever angle you're taking, the result is the same, and that's that people don't read, or users do not read, most of a UI, no matter how great the words are. We have to be sure to trim it down, add headings, use lists, and prioritize those words by means of either using color with the text, using text sizes, several different things. So the first step on top of that is to speak human. There was a DevCon presentation done a few years ago by a colleague / karaoke enthusiast, Damian Kiesling, that I encourage everybody to go to the YouTubes, find, and watch it. And basically, in his talk, he goes over how our users are not robots. We need to speak to them like they're people. You know, in a nutshell, we just talk to them like you're sitting face to face with them. Think about it. If one wrong word can ruin someone's experience, as a user, why waste time trying to decode what someone is saying on a screen when, especially in our healthcare setting, we potentially need every second? I don't want to sit here and have to decode what's on a screen. I need to make a decision and I need to do something. Once we get past that want to sit and talk like a robot, always remember to write with your heart and then edit with your brain. The way that I see it, the first draft should always come from the heart, and then we edit afterwards. You trust your gut. Once you've written out your ideas, you can turn to research and, refine those as needed, but just go with the rule of, if it doesn't sound right to you, if you're not satisfied with the way that you've written it, it's very likely our users will feel the same way. Again, we all speak the same language, so just trust your instincts. If you ever get in a situation that maybe you aren't sure if you're using the correct term, use things like this. This is Google Trends. So this is a very common, what's best situation, and this is log on, log in, sign on, and which is more widely used across the industry. So by using a resource like this, we can find out that in this specific example, sign on is used wildly more than the rest. So we can take those words that we've written down just instinctively and find out, okay, actually this is the one that's used throughout other applications more than any other ones. And by doing this, we make an immediate connection with our users by using words that they recognize. Again, they're not having to question what we've put on a screen. Lastly, we need to be sure to always be consistent. Consistency is key. So just like we have style guides and we want to be consistent with our designs and our functionality, we need to make sure that our words are consistent. Users will get very confused if we use different terminology or the same terminology for different purposes or different terminology for the same purpose. This includes all range of text. This is buttons, labels, everything in between. And it's not just about confusing the user, but again, if we are using the same terminology across all our solutions, we are conditioning them to our voice, our tone, and our language. And we begin to create something that I bring up several times today, and that's our personality. So now let's take a look at this screen again. And we're going to apply our first update. This one is pretty minor, so I'm going to kind of talk about what I'm going to do before I show it. And we just discussed that our users don't read. So I've gone through and I've taken out words that are redundant or pose no real value to the screen. And then we also discussed that giving hierarchy. So we draw out words that they need to read now with secondary text that they can read if they need to. So by doing this, we are calling text out that they need to read now to make a decision. So here, like I said, we're starting to create a language. So we have primary, secondary text. We've increased text sizes. So again, this was a small update, but it's baby steps. We're starting to create that language. So now let's dive into our next section. This is declutteringness. So this is the part of the presentation where I feel that many of us in the room versus me will butt heads even after we've created this beautiful friendship that's been blossoming so gracefully. I know we've all had conversations like this where we're in a meeting or we're talking to someone and we're like, well, what do we need to see? What do we need to put on the screen? All of it. Absolutely, but what about all of it? Okay, but what if all of it? And so while this may sound like a great idea to put everything on a screen that a user needs at once, we need to remember that users' attention is a precious resource, and it should be allocated accordingly. So cluttering our interfaces overloads our users with way too much information. Every added button, every image, every line of text just makes the screen more complicated. And again, while this may sound appealing, it could have seriously negative effects on usability, how fast our users can actually use our solutions, and the cognitive load. This quote always sticks out to me. It's one that I love, and it's always in the back of my head, and it's that perfection is achieved when there's nothing left to take away. It doesn't finish off by saying there's nothing left to add. So we have to remember that. Information put on a screen for any reason other than being absolutely essential adds to the cognitive load. By adding to the cognitive load, we lose both valuable space and the patience of our users. We just learned again that they don't read, so we need to make sure that the only thing they have to read is what they need to complete a task. So we need to reduce the effort they have to put in to get what they want. This next part is something very important to remember, even if it sounds like it's a little against the grain or against the norm, and that is that 100 clear screens is always better than one cluttered one. And again, I understand that in the healthcare space we have a lot of data, but being selective about what data we show could have major benefits. When we focus on decluttering, we think about ways to collapse extraneous information or reduce the calls to action, and by initially just showing required content and hide the content that's only necessary when the user needs it, and then they can call for that. This may sound intimidating or unappealing. However, by doing this correctly, we're allowing the users to dig deeper when they need to in sections when it's necessary, and it causes less confusion and happier users. The last point I want to make is survey says good. White space is good. If used correctly, it can help immensely, again, with the legibility, the usability, and overall experience of our users. So now let's look at this screen again. We were just here, and we've played with the text a little bit. We've started to add some language. But now let's add in this decluttering. Let's add some white space. Let's clean things up a bit. So now we've had a pretty large update to the screen and of the information being displayed. A grid system has been added to add spacing to make sure it's consistent around. We've added white space for things like his agenda and his tasks. We've taken out things that aren't due or aren't happening today. So this allows me to get a quick look at what I need to do now, and if I want to, I can dig into the schedule section and see what's coming up the rest of the week. But right now, what's going on today? For the bills or the money that he owes, probably a lot of people, we took out everything that wasn't due immediately. So right here we see he owes 10,000 units to the Sovereign because Rocket stole their batteries and they're not happy, and I've got 2 days to do so. The stuff that's coming up in a few weeks isn't as pressing. I can dig if I want, but I don't have to. I can just see this right now. So with all that being said, and we've cleaned up the design, it's really not the best place it can be. There's still some confusion. We cleaned it up, but is it any more useful? We can read stuff quicker, but is it really helping the user at all? So we're going to move on to the last session, and that is clarity. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably sitting there like, wait a minute. Isn't clarity and decluttering kind of the same thing? Well, no, it's not. Decluttering is removing all the information we don't need at the time, and clarity is using what we've got left over in such a way that the user has no confusion about what's going on or how to complete a task, or if I click this button, what's going to happen. So if we do it correctly, improving clarity of a screen should feel like an invisible hand that just guides the user along the journey. After all, even the coolest feature or most compelling content is useless if no one can find it. I'm going to use this next quote. I'm going to cut it in half and kind of talk about it as I go through it. And the first half of it is, clarity refers to focus on one particular message or goal at a time, rather than attempting to accomplish too much at once. And basically, what I want you to take from that is, when we talked about words and taking out the words that don't matter, we also need to remember this applies to actions as well. So we need to make sure that we're not saying, well, I've cleaned up the screen, but there's potentially 37 things you can do on it. But there's not a lot of stuff on it. It's still very confusing. We need to be sure that we keep everything clean and clear. The second part of the quote is, simplicity is often responsible for the dumbing of information rather than the illumination of it. So, kind of what I just said, something difficult may be made to look simple just by the means of organization. And again, we saw on our last screen that it was cleaner, we added some space, and it was easier to kind of browse, but was it really more useful? We had no visual guidance, no interface cues of what exactly was being viewed. We still had to do a little reading to find out where I was at. This is the part of our user's experience where we build trust. By using color and shapes consistently, we're building this language, we're building this trust. And how we do this may sound cheesy, but a good plan to follow is simply use the golden rule. Just like we brought up with words and speaking to our users in a way that maybe we would if we were face-to-face or speaking to them like they're a person, it's the same thing here. Explain things like you would want them explained to you. Create workflows in a way in which you would expect them to behave. Don't make a button that says commit, but when you click it, it removes something. It's a very extreme example, I understand that, but what I'm getting at is that is very confusing and frustrating to our users to have something that they believe does one thing and it does something completely different. Last part of this section is color. By using color appropriately, we can call attention to objects using high contrast. And then by making sure our colors are used consistently, we're teaching our users a visual tone. Just like as our words were set up, we're setting our tone with language, color sets our tone visually. This again adds to that personality I brought up earlier. This will condition our user to understand rules that we've created. For example, let's say blue is a primary button. They will become conditioned to that, and they understand that later in the workflow when they see a blue button, this is going to do the primary action on the screen. And on top of color, though, we have to be sure that we're using it appropriately. A very important part of color is that we, of course, do our homework to make sure that it passes accessibility. So we can't just using color however which way we want. I'm going to use this as an example. Here, we have a button. If we push this button, we destroy Thanos. Everyone goes home happy. They get to tell their family that it was surprisingly easy over a nice home-cooked meal. But it's very difficult to read. And if you put this on a screen with a whole bunch of stuff, you're going to overlook it. We have to be sure that our users can actually see, read, and use the features and functionality we put in front of them. So we're going to make our last stop for design on this screen. We've now added some color for guidance. We removed all color or only placed in color for primary navigation or primary actions. We've used our words appropriately and are clear with our design. Now, you may have noticed between the last design update and this one, we've actually added information. And I wanted to do this to hit home again that clarity and decluttering are different. We cleaned up our design last time and added more white space and broke things up to scan through them, but the cards didn't have any headers, so you'd have to read to find out, well, what exactly is this? That, the buttons just said pay or add, and without any titles, it could confuse the user, what exactly am I paying for, or what exactly am I adding? So we've also added titles to all of the navigation on the right side, because icons by themselves force the user to learn. So here, they don't have to guess. And we're also making a connection with the icons there and the icons on the right. Did I say right earlier? I meant left. On the right side of the screen, so agenda, and on the right, and agenda on the left match, and so on and so forth. So now that we've attacked all the design portions, it's time to make sure that we're really as smart as we think we are and move on to validation. The first part of that is testing our designs. This is a topic that many of us have heard before. There have been talks both yesterday and in previous DevCons, and I'm sure if you're on a UX project at all, user testing comes up quite a bit. So one reason why I feel this is very important, very simply, is this example right here. We have a designer, me, or one of these guys. We have a strategist, a solution designer, an engineer, or any other stakeholder at Cerner, everybody else in the room. And then we have a user. Now, the designers and all the other stakeholders have most likely been in rooms for weeks or months going through these designs, and we think that we've got it at a great point. We've done all kinds of discussions and iterations, and we feel that it's at a good spot. But even the most painstakingly considered UX will ultimately contain some unforeseen flaw when we put it in the real world. It's essential to find out if the intended workflow is as easy to use as possible. We need to make sure that the user gets the maximum value while achieving their ultimate goal. All of this while being delighted. We should take it upon ourselves to take all the issues that most of our users had while testing and fix them. If through testing we find a feature isn't nearly as usable as we thought it was, or maybe we find that the users aren't going to use this great feature that we thought that they would need, and it's just filling space. We have to be sure not to be too stubborn to potentially go back and remove or fix that. We need to make sure that we plan accordingly. So if we find that that feature is needed but it's not usable, we need to make sure that we have the time to go back to the drawing board and be able to fix that without, running into releases or not being able to fix it. And again, the last portion of this, delighting our users, or did it delight them, it's not just about completing the task, but did they enjoy their time using it? Were they frustrated at all? They could complete every task maybe, and we got the checkbox that this passed on the test, but if it took them a long time to find, if something was unclear, if they just guessed and they got lucky, while it passed, it might as well have failed. We need to remember that we still want to delight them. There are several potentials for testing, and we have to make sure that we are prepared to address, especially the negative ones. This next topic is my personal favorite, but it's also the hardest to talk about in a room full of people, several of them, most of them, that you've never met. So I'm just going to dive right in with a quote from the infamous Kendrick Lamar, "Be humble." I like Kendrick Lamar. I saw an opportunity and I took it. I regret nothing. For today, however, I'm going to take it a step further and say that ego kills design. This can apply to any portion of the design process, but I feel that it's most important here. The reason I think that is because after testing, I feel that it's the most opportune time for ego to poke its ugly head in. Like we just talked about, the designers and the other stakeholders have most likely been in a room for weeks or months designing this out, and then we find out that it didn't test well. Well, that guy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's fine. We've gone through this. And you start pushing back rather than being like, no, actually, 5 out of 5 people failed that. You don't know what you're talking about. We have to be sure that we keep ourselves in check. And so for this discussion especially, I'm going to use myself or the designers as an example because I don't want to potentially destroy this delightful new friendship we've created. So, we'll jump right into the next part and to say that it stops learning. Now, as designers, learning and growing is at the heart of what we do. Everything we see, hear, and feel builds upon our ability to help others and create incredible experiences. But when ego creeps in, all we see, hear, and feel is ourselves. By understanding why ego exists and why it's the biggest enemy of experience design or design in general, will do more than just affect our designs, but it will also affect our users. Realizing ego is an issue is a very, very hard lesson to learn. It takes a huge amount of failure. It's a hard conversation, and it's hard conversations and self-exploration to realize the damage that it's doing. It makes you very defensive, just like that testing example I brought up. You push back even though you've got the information in your face to say this didn't pass. You become overconfident. So maybe you've had a test that's done really well. You've had 2 or 3 that have done well, and you think, now you're king of the castle because I've had tests that have done well, so clearly I know what I'm doing. and it closes you off to new experiences. You stop learning. You stop trying, and you stop creating. You become satisfied, and you want to be sure to never be satisfied. Keep pushing that envelope. 2 things that you can do to help this is to become mindful and to become honest. At the very least, be honest about your designs. Personally, I've spent far too much time lying to myself about my own abilities and the story that I told myself. So again, you get a few successful tests under your belt, and you get really confident. So only when I took a step back and became more open and honest did I realize that this was a problem. And remember, we're all doing design to solve problems. So when we let our own feelings or opinions get in the way, we create more problems than we solve. And again, it's not really for us, it's for our users. So even if something fails, but we still get it in code or we still get it in the design because you wanted it, but we found out that it's actually not very useful, that's not harming you. You still go home with a win. You feel like you still got your trophy because you got that in, but now our users are suffering. So remember the keynote from last year, and that's to fail often, fail hard. If something fails, everybody in the room is a part of it, so the designers and everybody else, we're all a part of that. And rather than to sulk on it or to let that get us down, we need to take that opportunity as a wonderful opportunity to learn and to grow our designs. Now, on to the last part. At the end of the day, after all of this, we need to remember to delight our users. And what do I mean by delight? And I'm off. Too fast. I don't know who's running my slides, but I got it. All right, delight is a word that we're hearing more and more to describe pleasurable moments in our experiences. So if anybody went to Paul Weaver's talk yesterday, he had a whole discussion about emotional connections with designs. That's what this is. Delight is the magic that makes our users fall in love. There we go. Nope, never mind. Those aren't my notes. It's first DevCon talk. This is great. Okay. Delight is the magic that makes us fall in love. There it is. Thank you, man. Or woman. Sorry. Makes our users fall in love with our solutions. It's the core element that we should strive for when designing. There are many elements to this, but the one that I've said multiple times today is personality. So when we're talking about words and colors and shapes and all those different things, we're creating that personality. And we can do it in such a way that puts a smile on our user's face or just delights them. Personality is the mysterious force that attracts us to certain people and repels us from others, by A.A. Ron Walter. If we use the power of magic, we'll just change some of those words out and say applications or solutions that repels us from others. And I said that just now. So it's a little different for us because our users aren't the type of people who can download an app on their phone and say, this isn't at all what I thought it was, or this is really hard, or this game is no fun, and they remove it. They have to use our solutions. If they work for a facility that uses Cerner, they use Cerner. So if we create solutions for them that doesn't delight and it frustrates them, they have to use that day in and day out. Imagine the stress that adds. If we take a step back, we can really see that delighting our users can mean several different things, especially if we are looking at different venues, different users, etc. We just need to remember to reduce the obstacles by minimizing the pain points and frustration that a user may experience throughout the journey. One way to do that is to remember that empathy is key. You should anticipate their questions and identify moments of anxiety and use those as opportunities to delight. I want to give some examples of how this could be different for each one of our users, and this is an example of how we could potentially use this delight in our consumer space. For those people that might be using, let's say, a behavioral health app or a mood tracking app, they might have had a rough day. And then at the end of the day, they get on the app to track that and put that in. But maybe this is the first full week that they've done that, or maybe the first full month. And after they've tracked their mood, they get something like this. Something that's kind of delightful to watch. Is it really necessary? Does it really add to anything? Not really, but it adds to their experience. It creates an emotional connection. What if that put a smile on their face after a rough day? Just something, maybe we've got a character that congratulates them. Something that's fun to, and you can enjoy it while you're watching it, can make a huge emotional impact on a user. Now let's jump to potentially a different user, maybe someone who does scheduling all day. It could mean that this is them today. This is their goal. These are the obstacles they have to jump through every time they do the tasks they do every single day. They get on their phone, they're scheduling patients, and they just have these hoops that they have to jump through. Delight for them can mean putting those obstacles back and creating a workflow that does the heavy lifting for them. We bypass these obstacles, and they no longer have to deal with this. Not only is this faster, but it's easier. So they're able to do more than they could normally in a regular day, but now they're delighted because they don't have to worry about these headaches that they did before. And we'll take that another step further, and we'll put this to a nurse or a clinician, and we use the same logic to make a intuitive, clear, easy-to-use system that does their heavy lifting. But this goes beyond them, and it starts to affect other people. If we create this system, this solution that does the heavy lifting for them, they spend less time on the computer, and they're spending more time with the patient. The patient is then allowed to take the normal time that they would just be awkwardly sitting on an exam table while the physician or nurse is typing stuff in, and they get to spend that with that caretaker. They get to start asking the questions that they want to ask. They start to create a relationship with that caregiver. Then in the future, maybe if something's coming up, they can message them. They feel more comfortable because they get on that first name basis. Now we're going beyond affecting our users, and we're affecting the people that they care for, and that is a huge benefit. I could go on and on about delight because I really am passionate and love this topic. But the one thing that we need to remember is if we do our due diligence with testing and adding layers that provide not only value, but we can add delight as well. Never underestimate the power of delight to improve the user's experience. Delight isn't about your product, it's about your user. It's not about a feature, it's about an emotion. Make our solutions a joy to use by connecting feelings with features. All right, deep breath. That was all of it. So to recap, what we talked about today were, for design, we talked about words and why they were important. We talked about decluttering our design, removing all unnecessary information to help our users find what they need as fast as possible. We talked about clarity and how guiding our users to their goal through meaningful placement of objects and colors. We moved on to validation by talking about testing to find the truth out about our designs. Are we really solving the goals we set out to solve? We talked about being humble and keeping our own selves in check to benefit our users' experience. And then we talked about delighting our users, and at the end of the day, we should strive to brighten their day. Please get on the guidebook and leave feedback. We're doing it a little differently this year, so no more pens and paper. If you go and find this talk on either my schedule or the schedule in general, open it up and scroll to the bottom. There's speaker feedback. Share your thoughts and submit, and I'll be down here off the podium if anybody has any questions. Thank you.